Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful and historic neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please do be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Good Pods, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Maaria Mozaffar. She is a civil rights attorney working to build more inclusive schools and communities for everyone. Before we invite Maaria into the studio, we have a special invitation for authors. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to help you tell the world all about it. The Reading with Your Kids podcast has been helping authors celebrate their books since 2017. We've published over 1,300 episodes of the show, and we are looking forward to doing at least that many more. Here are some of the ways that we can help you celebrate your book. You can be a guest on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy. It gives you the chance to have a long-form conversation where you are telling the world all about your fantastic book. You can also submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel. If they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And with that distinction comes a number of really powerful tools that can let the world know that your book is worthy of their consideration. And we have a brand new monthly promotion program. It is a fantastic program. Authors absolutely love it. We celebrate your book through commercials on the podcast, messages to our 67,000 plus social media followers, and display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. You can learn all about it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, clicking on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page, and scrolling on down to the various services. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Illinois. Our guest today is something different today. Our guest today is an author, but she doesn't write children's books or even books. She writes legislation, and she's a civil rights attorney, and she is passionate about helping families and communities build inclusive schools. Please welcome to the show, Maaria Mozaffar. Hey, Maaria, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to say you are correct. I don't write books. I write legislations, but I have written a book and I enjoy writing legislations more.
Well, what is it? To be honest, because I'll be honest with you, I've read lots of legislation, both civil, government legislation. I've read lots of quote-unquote legislation, official documents from my church, and I like reading books a whole lot more than I like reading any of that stuff. What is it about writing legislation that you are so passionate about?
Oh, that's such a fascinating question because it just tells me how far removed people are from the actual power of what the words are in the legislation, because the legislation dictates what your norm and your society will be, right? It dictates and defines what's acceptable, what is something we should be paying attention to, who needs protection, what can we do to support a community or a group of people or an individual or people who have been forgotten, circumstances that we want to change and we just don't know what pragmatic approach to take. Legislation literally lays down how we live our lives and implement these daily conditions within our community. So it's extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm. So as opposed to an author who is writing a book that hopes to inspire certain behaviors, legislation is the written word that requires certain behaviors.
Well, I would say this. I would say say this, when every legislation has an intent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's written with an intent to change something, to better something, to improve something, protect somebody. And when you look at it that way, it is very inspiring, because what is driving you to write those words? So I find the language very inspiring. A lot of legislations that you'll see, there are purposes and findings sections. If you look at the United States Constitution, you can go back and look at the purposes and findings and create assume an intent of what the individual was that was drafting those words. So that's what's so inspiring, is you actually get to match your intent with writing that can actually implement what you would want to see in the world. And I think that's absolutely beautiful if you take that approach. Of course, there's a technical aspect of it, of how we get there. And the things we put in place, but the intent overall is always very inspiring. If, of course, you agree with the intent, that's what it always comes down to.
Yeah. I'm sure some people are listening and thinking to themselves, wait a minute. I thought that's why we hired the reps and the senators and the Congress people. I thought they were the ones and their aides that write the legislation. It's actually bigger than that. Legislation can be written by an attorney, by groups, and presented to these folks.
Yes. No, that's such an important distinction. And I want people to know that, because that's actually how I found my pathway into this work, is I identified gaps of legislations that were not being written, problems that were not being solved in a certain way that I thought could be interesting to look at and see how, I can approach it. And then I would meet community members that were facing certain circumstances that I felt were long overdue to be looked at. And there were advocates who were doing this work as well. And teaming up with them and working with different people and learning how to advocate is so critical. And then when you get to actually making the change, you realize that everybody's very busy. Everybody's advocating for themselves. And there are gaps that have existed now because of that. And money also makes a big difference. Communities that need the most help actually don't have a lot of money. And so a lot of the times elected officials are busy running their campaigns and then running re-election campaigns. And that donor voice matters. Well, what if you're not a donor? And there's a lot of elected officials that don't have time to listen to you if you're not a donor. They should, but they don't always listen to you. But then there's many who do. And finding those legislators that have that good intent, that want to help people, that want to identify problems that other people have just dropped. I don't want to deal with this session. Identifying those, and then really studying a problem, writing the legislation yourself, and handing it to the legislator and saying, listen, here's a problem, here's the solution, and here's the language. Let's partner up and do this. And that's how I really learned how to do the work. I literally learned how to read legislations and then put my own words in and try to do what I could do.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I wanted you to be on the Reading with Your Kids podcast is I think that our conversation today is going to help give parents some information that they need, that they can use to help their kids kind of understand what is going on in the system, how laws are made, how legislation happens, and also to help them understand that they can do something, that they're probably not going to sit down and write legislation at 7 or 8 or 10 years old, but maybe there's something that they're seeing in the community that's upsetting them and that they have an idea of how that can change. And perhaps they can connect with a legislator or with somebody like yourself that can help them take that idea and put it into legislation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the whole idea of being an agent of change and being someone that walks around one's community with an eye on how everything can be equitable and appropriate for everybody, so everybody has what they need to have a successful, happy life, whatever that means for somebody. To put that in children at an early age is so critical, because then they walk around knowing that it's not about just themselves. right? So once you identify that, then the next step is, wow, somebody is not getting the same type of tutoring that I'm getting. Somebody doesn't have across the state the same type of laptops that I have. They don't have the same food for breakfast that I have, the grocery store. And so these things for children to really understand and recognize, and there's many, many opportunities for young students and families to testify at hearings, to give testimonies, to write letters to their legislators, right? And say that something has to happen. And it's always going to be a community effort. There's one person and one issue that may be the catalyst, but you never reach the finish line without a team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I've pointed out this example a number of times here in the podcast. It's been a while, so I'll share it again. When my son was in kindergarten, one of his classmates came in very upset because on his way to school, he saw that a goose had been hit by a car. And so he wrote a letter to the mayor of Boston at that time, who just happened to live in our neighborhood. And the mayor did whatever the mayor needed to do, go to city council and whatnot. And then there was a goose crossing sign put up in the area. And there haven't been any geese hit there since then. But that all happened because of a 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Look at that. I mean, it's so incredible. It's so incredible. And I want to take this conversation as an example. I mean, you gave the example of a child indicating what needs to be done. I think as adults and as parents, we get so busy in our daily routine and on our obligations that are serving us and our families that we forget that there's so many different things around us that could just use a helping hand or someone to stop and say, this is not correct. Like stopping saying, don't hit that family of geese. It's a really huge step that this child took to take ownership of that responsibility. And if we all walked around our neighborhoods and our communities with that mindset, if we serve other people, automatically, I believe in the chain effect that communities serve you as well. Mm-hmm. So this is an interdependent relationship. I mean, that story's so inspiring. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, it was, it really was a big deal for all the kids in that class, but also in the school, because it did just remind everybody that we are part of a community, that we all have a voice, and we all have the ability to stand up and be the voice for people who might not have as loud a voice or a voice.
Absolutely. And I think it also sends kids a message that having a louder voice or having the opportunity to have what you have comes with the responsibility as well. And so, I always say if you're getting educated, make sure you look at people who are not educated so you can take them with you. And that goes with everything, every aspect of your life. I think our whole notion of humanity is that we're dependent on each other. Mm-hmm. So that goes into what you give and what you take and what responsibility you have. If you enjoy something, don't you want other people to enjoy it too?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me, what was the first piece of legislation that you were involved in?
That's a great question. So I actually was approached by a community organization on the south side of Chicago called Inner City Muslim Action Network. And they were working with a coalition of Christian and Muslim and groups and community groups across the south side of Chicago called Developing Justice Coalition. And they were working on low-level drug offenses and how so many individuals who had low-level drug offenses where people were not distributing but were users and were addicts and were young, were getting felonies on their record. While in the suburbs in Illinois, the same crime and kids who were participating in that were getting sent to drug school and would be like a weekend school where you learn about the toxic harms of drug use. But they weren't getting a felony. Mm-hmm. And so the first legislation that I wrote was creating a program and expanding that drug school program in Cook County and making it accessible for all of those individuals, so they would have a chance just like any other student. Of course, then we also had an appropriations bill that provided funding for it, and that was where we had some issue. But it's a process. And I think the first step is identifying it and making it clear and then working with the stakeholders. But that was my first step into it. And it was really, really, really a powerful experience. And I also found such inspiration and my place in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's huge. I don't think people understand that piece of legislation that you worked on really changed people's lives, because when you're 18, 19 years old and you get arrested and have a felony conviction on your record for something that now in a lot of states is legal, well, that felony conviction can keep you from going to school, can keep you from certain jobs, can keep you from getting certain loans and buying certain properties.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. It's very easy to separate people based on their mistakes and their weak moments and their failings, and to keep them demoralized. It's very easy to do that because it keeps us safe, as if their flaws and their mistakes aren't going to touch us. But the reality is that people's flaws and failings have nothing to do with a propensity or a socioeconomic environment where it's always going to happen here. There's a lot of different factors, and it could happen to anyone. Mm-hmm. And so when you remember that anybody can go down a path that is destructive, you want to save that individual because you would want to save yourself.
Mm-hmm. The image and my mind is really weird. It just, as I'm talking to fascinating people such as yourself, and I think it must be a process my brain tries to help me wrap around these complex ideas. And as you were talking about, reaching out and saving that person who had made a choice and was going down a destructive path, I thought of being at a pool, being at a lake, and seeing somebody struggling in the water. You would never throw them an anchor or a rock. You do everything you can to save that person.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And unless you have decided that you can watch them drown and it won't enter your mind because you've created a world where you don't have to think about them anymore once they've gone. Mm-hmm. And that's what has happened in many situations. A lot of individuals and kids make mistakes and they've had circumstances which lead them a certain way, but everybody deserves a second chance. And it's very easy to remove yourself from despair. You can create a world for yourself where despair it doesn't touch you. But here's the thing. When you're in an interdependent society, the question I always ask is, if you're enjoying something, don't you want someone else to as well? And that really is where we should all start. If you're having a good moment and you know it's good for you and it's good for your family, you want many people to experience that.
And I believe there's statistics out there that show that when we do reach out and help save these people, that the money it takes to save folks is actually an investment, because then we don't have to pay to keep somebody locked up in a prison.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a more, complicated, and I wouldn't say complicated, I would say multi-layered conversation. It has different angles to it. But one thing is for sure, and to make it very crystal clear, are you helping people by incarcerating them, and helping youth by incarcerating them, instead of giving them paths and avenues to redeem themselves and get skills where they can enter back into society and better their lives, And that really includes a lot of things: community support, pastoral support, right? Chaplain support, support of healing and medical support. There's a lot of addictions. There's a lot of mental issues that happen when you're an addict. So all of these things need to be taken into account. And of course, if you're spending tons of money to just lock them up and not give them that, then you're going to continue to lock people up. So, but bringing it back to children, mm-hmm. and reminding them, how do we teach them, right? Because we teach them what's right and wrong. As parents, that's our job, to teach them morality or teach them what's right and wrong so they don't go down a destructive path, right? I think a second level of parenting that's very important to me is creating that path of empathy for people who have fallen and who have gone down a destructive path. And I think if we can create individuals and we ourselves become those types of people where we protect ourselves from failings, but also understand that people can fail and not identify them as, people that will always do things that will get them in trouble, but just, it could be various things. But to create that empathy, I think that strikes a balance with people who have made good decisions and people who have not been able to. Because I think if you can make good decisions, you must have the wisdom to know that you got to pull other people up.
Maaria, I have a dilemma, and maybe you can help with this because you seem like a very creative person, obviously very empathetic. When I created the Reading with Your Kids podcast, I created it mainly because I knew that the time I invested reading to my kids when they were young and on my lap began a lifelong conversation that continues with them today when they're 25 and 29 years old. I know that time together created this bond between us. And so I started the show with the intention of saying, hey, parents, you want to love your kids. The best way to love your kids is read them books. And then I discovered that, when you're reading the books there, obviously you're helping them learn how to read and you're developing their vocabulary, that you're helping them develop empathy. And then I discovered that when you read with your kids every day, 20 minutes a day, when they get to school, they will have heard over 800,000 more words than their peers who weren't read to. And I thought, that's a tremendous advantage, and that advantage really doesn't go away. But then I thought, but what about those kids who haven't been read to? How can we reach those kids and those parents? I'm imagining those parents who aren't reading with their kids. They're never going to listen to my podcast. And there's a multitude of issues why they can't. Maybe they don't feel comfortable reading. Maybe they don't have time. Maybe they're not able to read in English. Maybe they're working 3 jobs. But what can we do other than, because to me, telling parents, who are reading with their kids, stop, you're creating an unfair advantage. That I'm never going to do that. But what can we do to help those kids, to lift those kids up? What can we do as a community to lift those other kids up so that when they enter school, they don't have this huge gap?
Well, I love that question. And I think we're in a very interesting time because of technology too, right? So a lot of kids are not reading anymore because they're on tablets. First of all, it's even the people that have the access and the ability to read to their kids have really replaced those books with tablets. And so kids are not having that interaction or not reading the things that you would have read or you have read to your children, I'm assuming. And then secondly are the individuals, like you say, who don't have the capacity because of time or work or language issues to read to their kids. I think we have to use the environment that we are in and make it work for us, right? So I would use the analogy of Instagram and social media. It can create a lot of toxic environments and dialogues. But if you're someone who's looking for inspiration and uplifting people, well, you can actually find powerful people and voices that are positive in those same platforms. So I think the same way where the tablet could really, really hurt that bonding time where that child is not using the vocabulary, we can use technologies to create community reading, right? So if we did community reading story time, where a child is able to look at a screen or go to a library or even have, 40 minutes a day in the morning at a public school institution and have community reading time, I mean, that would be huge. It's something they can access. The person that's reading to them through that screen, it's as if they're reading with them. So there's so many possibilities out there. I think it's really looking at what resources are possible and then making it work. To have a positive impact. But I so value what you're saying because I think that time that child feels, it's not just the vocabulary. It's that confidence that there is an adult in my life that is willing to sit down with me and tell me a story. I must be somebody special. Right?
Yep.
So that's a great feeling.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's because even when our kids are calling us names and acting like they hate us, we're still the most important person in your kid's life. As a parent, you are the most important person in your kid's life. And when you take the time It's, like the president decided that he is going to spend 20 minutes talking to me every day. It's like the vice president decided that she's going to sit down and call me and find out what's going on in my life and tell me a story. That's who you are to your kids. And when you sit down and you take the time and say, hey, child of mine, everything else stops. I'm with you. You have my full attention. That's a huge statement.
Yeah, and it builds a lot of internal assurance, right?
Yeah.
You want children to be self-assured that they are valuable and that the most important person in their life thought so as well.
Yeah. Hey, Maaria, I think I could talk to you all day long, but we have a limited time. What is it that you're working on right now that is really inspiring you today?
Well, I'll give you this, which is on point for your audience, is that I serve right now as the Director of Advocacy and Policy at the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. And so I write legislations in that aspect for inclusive communities and families and making them empowered. And one of the legislations was to actually create, it's called Cross-Cultural Mediation and Bullying in Schools Act, which basically creates a method in which if there is a bullying incident on campus and it's based on bias, right? So if it's against your race or your ethnicity or your religion, sexual orientation, or disability, any of those categories in the Illinois Human Rights Act, then you can suspend the child. You can all, of course, have detention. Those things are there. But my background as a mediator has taught me that really it comes down to understanding and changing patterns of behavior that actually works in the long run. So we actually, through this method, create that if you have bias-based bullying, the child who's been bullied and the bully has to go through a mediation in which the victim is empowered to articulate what they felt with the slurs that were stated. And then the bully is educated to learn what the impact was on this child. And what we want to do is intervene early so people can understand how to embrace diversity, right? And also how to not get into the practice of casual hate crimes, which eventually could be identified as hate crimes because, it's no big deal. And so we wanted to intervene early. And of course, absent physical danger and physical harm, if the child feels this is going to be dangerous, it's a different story. But really giving the victim the ability to create a new narrative in a bullying incident regarding their identity is so powerful. And so I'm just inspired by, what can be done and how people can be uplifted and families can be uplifted by knowing that route is there.
That's fascinating. I love the idea of intervening early and helping all of us understand that we are, right down to it, no matter what our orientation is, what our faith is, whether we have faith, traditional faith or not, that deep down we're all part of the same human family.
Absolutely. And I think that is stronger than any divisive belief that you have. Because we all cry and we all lose loved ones. So, and that is an overwhelming emotion that we all have.
Yeah. How far along in the process are you with this issue?
Oh, it's passed and it has become law. And now we're in the process of educating all the school districts about it.
Wonderful. So it really is, and that's another thing parents can kind of talk to their kids about and also just learn for themselves. It's not like with the case of, my son's friend and the goose and the goose crossing sign, which maybe took a couple of months. This is a situation where it's, how long did it take from the time the idea was born to getting it passed, and now you're still going to take some time. It's going to take some time educating the different school systems. How long do you think that entire process is going to be?
It took 1 year. It took 1 year. And I will tell you this, luckily for me, I don't want to jinx myself, but any legislation I've worked on has passed. And I'm okay with it not passing. I can always come and try again. But I've had a great track record. Our teams have had a great track record. And I feel like what stops people from making these types of changes is thinking that it'll never happen. Mm-hmm. Well, you actually have nothing to lose, because the alternative is that we have a condition that is harming people. And that's not an option either. Right. So you just go forth and be extremely strategic. Keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah. Hey, where can people go to find out more about what you're doing and maybe help?
Sure. So I have a website, and I'll spell it out. It's Maaria Moz as in zebra, A F as in Frank, F as in Frank, AR.com. And that's my website. And it has a couple of different projects that I have. It has some press stuff, and I'll put this podcast on it as well, so people can hear it. And you can contact me through there, of course. And there have been other states that I have spoken to, individuals and advocates in other states who are interested in the legislations, would like to see it in their communities. So I'm open to having those conversations as well, however I can help.
We've had a really eye-opening conversation with a fantastic civil rights attorney and a fascinating person, Maaria Mozaffar. Maaria, thank you so very much for being with us.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Argyro Graffi. She'll be here to celebrate the adventures of Bentley, a really neat children's book series. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Maaria Mozaffar. I also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.